Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This morning I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Hart Publishing. It's part of Bloomsbury Publishing plc, and they've kindly sent me the book. It's on European state aid, law and policy, written by Conor Quigley, Queen's Counsel. I think he pronounces it Quigley, not Quigley, but I'm going to say Quigley. This book is a third edition. It's an excellent book. It's detailed. I found it a very interesting book to read and to review. My wife Elizabeth and I talked about the book before we wrote the review, and of course the review will be on the web and in the journals. But what we've said is this book is essential reading for competition and tax lawyers, and it's now in a new third edition. Now let's look at the book briefly before we go to the review. That's the front cover. It's a hardback. There is the spine. There's nothing on the back. Lovely little Hart logo there. I always like to point that out. Now we go to the back of the book first. It's just under 800 pages long, around about 800. That's the index you can see there. The index is referring to page numbers, not paragraph numbers, so you'll find it reasonably easy to find things. If we go to the front of the book, we've then got, there is the first front page. Then there's a very nice dedication, and the author has dedicated it to Mark Littman, Queen's Counsel, whom I'm sure many of you will know who are in practice, and I'm very delighted that he's done that. Do read his preface, which is well worth reading, which is setting out what we need for the new edition, and then the contents section itself. Reasonably detailed contents. You shouldn't have difficulty in finding what you're looking for. It's split into various parts, as you can see there, and then it runs to 20 chapters in total, and then we have a list of cases, and they're split. They start off with the Court of Justice of the European Union, as it's now called, the CJEU, and then it's got various other cases which of course are included. The usual citations you can see. I do find them quite difficult to actually find sometimes. There are the countries that are being sued. A lot of tables of cases running all the way through here. Then we get after that to some EU legislation. Remember, it's very much orientated to the European Union. And then part 1, state aid, and Article 107 of the TFEU. And that's where we start. State aid and the European Union, and it starts about how it was established originally by Articles 107 and 108, the notion of state aid in the EU, and we then go on from there, and it runs through, and you can see there is paragraph numbering, and you've got a lot of footnotes, so there's a lot of information, you see all the way through, a lot of footnotes. Very substantial work in its own right. And do not be too concerned about the way in which it's structured and everything else. I came into EU law a bit later because when I did my LLB, it wasn't really part of the system because I'm an older barrister. But when I did the bar vocational course, that was different, and I started learning very much more about the European Union as it wasn't known as that, of course, then, as the EC. But certainly things have changed dramatically. And of course we are looking at a referendum probably later this year. It's 2016 as I record this review. So an awful lot of things about the EU are going on at the moment. It's the main item on the political agenda. So what do we say about the book then? Because it's an important time for this book to come out, I think. Lawyers specialising in competition law or tax law or both will welcome this new third edition of what's a well-established and highly regarded work of reference by Conor Quigley, Queen's Counsel, recently published, as I say, by Hart, which is the imprint of Bloomsbury. State aid law in the European context has engendered a formidable corpus of legislation which demands in fact, the close analysis, explanation and commentary which this book amply provides, particularly in respect of recent developments and observations regarding the overlap between state aid and taxation. This raises the spectre of tax concessions to multinational companies, which may emerge in effect as a form of state aid. Now there's a quote from the author: although state aid remains a branch of competition law, the focus of attention has begun to swing toward taxation, particularly international tax arrangements, and of multinational groups as a source of state aid. The book's third chapter discusses the various issues pertaining to taxation and state aid in detail. And one can discern here a conflict of sorts between the duty of the European Union to establish a healthy internal market, with basis of what they're there for, characterised by a high degree of competitiveness, and the concept of the state aid, which confers an advantage on its recipients. Some would argue that state aid rather works against this aim, as one would assume it could, and almost certainly does, interfere with market forces. Think about it, must do, because of the money involved. But wait and be reminded that European state aid law and policy is a lot more complicated than that, hence the pressing need to have this book, and now in the third edition, and very welcome it is too. There's another quote from the author. He says, state aid entails an economic advantage to the beneficiary, adding that, quote, a proper understanding of the separate application of these notions of economic, selective and competitive advantage is crucial for a proper appreciation of the application of state aid law, which is relatively straightforward as a statement, I would suggest. This distinction, of course, between economic, selective and competitive advantage in matters relating to state aid is an important one, I think, and one which the author explains in some detail, so you do have some elucidation on it. It's also pointed out that state aid must contribute to European Union objectives, and that the European Commission, I wish they'd produce their accounts, has a wide discretion as to whether or not the granting of state aid may be permitted on the basis of the current legislation. Certainly, the Commission's supervisory duties are specifically addressed, and reference is made to the new guidelines which apply to all the major policy areas for the period 2014 to 2020. And I think that's quite important, because we don't know whether Britain will remain in the EU. The likelihood is we will, but we don't know. The figures are really a bit odd in terms of voting intention. It's quite possible we could leave, and if we do, again, we have to see where we are, because if we did leave, we would still have quite substantial links with the EU, and it may well be that the EU is looked at in a different way. I don't know, it's all for the future. But it is important to bear in mind where we are today, that's in February 2016, with European state aid law. Let me conclude by saying the book's easily navigable. I think it's easy to find things without too much difficulty. It functions as a superb research resource. There's a huge amount of data and reference material in it. It has extensive footnotes, which I'm grateful for, and over 80 pages of tables of cases and of the European Union legislation. That's right at the beginning. And as a thorough and scholarly work of reference, it should be considered an essential acquisition for lawyers, academics, and indeed all who are professionally involved in this increasingly complex area of law. And it is complex. It's not, I mean, that's one of the reasons why they're effectively making EU law compulsory. It's complicated to understand, but it is actually very much where we're moving to at the moment. Even if there's a Brexit, there's still going to be an awful lot of linkage between ourselves and the continent. Finally, there's a quote from the author. It says, European state aid law and policy, says the author, is on the basis of available materials stated as at the 1st of September 2015. And I'm just wondering with my crystal ball what it's going to be like on the 1st of September 2016. But that's for another review. Here's the book again. Conor, you've done a good job here. Thank you so much. There's the front. Let's just open it. Right, here we go. Services of General Economic Interest. So very much international trade orientated, of course. A lot of information. You see the structure. You've got some subheads. You've got plenty of footnotes throughout. The footnotes don't overdo it, which I think is quite good, because when you're dealing with anything, there's an awful lot of frankly, rather turgid material to get through. That's the same with anything to do with the EU. And I'm not, it's not a criticism, it's a statement of the objective statement, really. But you can see again, state aid for environmental protection. And I'll just end on that because one of the things that has been said, and I think I concur with it, if we did leave the European Union, there would be some massive changes in perhaps environmental law issues, certainly green policies, and that's something that we should all bear in mind. I'll leave you with that thought. But thank you very much to Conor Quigley and to Hart Bloomsbury for producing this new third edition. It's very gratefully received. Thank you to all. Bye-bye.